Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to this episode number 140 of the WP Builds podcast, which is entitled Feeling Insecure About Security, Part 1. It was published on Thursday the 8th of August 2019. My name's Nathan Wrigley from pictureandword.co.uk, a small web development agency based in the north of England. And I'll be joined in a few minutes by David Wormsley from davidwormsley.com because it's a discussion episode this week and we'll be talking about internet security like I just said. But a couple of things before we begin. If you wouldn't mind heading over to the wpbuilds.com website, I've got a few links I'd like to share with you. The first one is the subscribe link, so that's wpbuilds.com/subscribe. And there you'll be able to join our email list and be notified about updates, so podcast updates, news updates that we put out on Monday, and also updates to plugins when there's deals and promotions offered. We'll let you know about those. Also, you can subscribe to us with your favourite podcast player, join our 2,200 strong Facebook group, and find out what we do on YouTube and so on. So that's wpbuilds.com/subscribe. The other one is wpbuilds.com/deals, or you can just click the deals link in the main menu at the top of the website. And over there you'll find something akin to Black Friday. It's Black Friday, but every day of the week. You can get significant amounts off plugins and themes, and chances are if you're in the market to buy some WordPress product, it's worth heading over there and seeing, because you never know, there might be something there that you can snag a deal on. wpbuilds.com/contribute if you'd like to join us on the podcast and share something so that the community at large can understand something that you recently did that you're proud of. And wpbuilds.com/advertise if you would like to advertise on the WP Builds podcast. We have banner ads and audio inserts so that you can get your product out in front of a wider audience, a bit like the Page Builder Framework have done. Do you use a page builder to create your websites? The Page Builder Framework is a mobile responsive and lightning fast WordPress theme that works with Beaver Builder, Elementor, Breezy and other page builders. With its endless customization options in the WordPress customizer, it's the perfect fit for you or your agency. Go to wp-pagebuilderframework.com today, and we thank the Page Builder Framework for supporting the WP Builds podcast. Right, let's get stuck into it. Today we're talking about insecurity of security. It's part 1. We got to the end of this episode and realised it was far too long, so we kind of cut it in half. So you got part 1 this week, followed by part 2 next week. And in this episode, we talk about all of the usual security stuff that might be affecting WordPress freelancers and WordPress developers. So we talk about actually quite a lot of non-WordPress stuff, things like passwords, GDPR, that kind of thing. And then we talk about the things that we do with the sites that we manage and care plans and security plugins and so on. But there's more next week. For now, though, I hope you enjoy this week.
This discussion we're calling Feeling Insecure About Security. So we thought it was probably time that we discuss something that was kind of more practical. Nathan, we've been a bit sort of tree-huggy recently, haven't we? Talking about kind of personal stuff.
Yeah, you've got really into your psychology and your personality types and things like that as well. Yeah, so this is back to solid ground, shall we say?
Yeah. So we're talking about we're happy with it now because we've already had a chat, but I think so many of our friends don't feel they've got their WordPress security or the security sorted out in their business. So we thought we'd have a chat about all different areas of that.
Yeah.
So we're actually quite organized, aren't we? So we've actually got some categories of stuff to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's always good to sort of say at the beginning that, you know, there are people in the WordPress community who live and breathe this stuff. You know, they literally do WordPress security all day, every day. So we're kind of cribbing our collective memories about things that we've seen or things that we've heard. And but I would say that, you know, if you've got a real security, like proper concern about something, then this is probably not the place to get the perfect advice.
No, exactly. And you've done great interviews with people who know this stuff. But
Yes,
I guess
yeah.
we're coming at it from a different angle, aren't we, as business owners who have to make decisions
That's right.
about what we're going to, take on board from experts. So, yeah. So first thing, perhaps to talk about is the non-WordPress security side of things. So we've had GDPR, and most countries have some form of data protection where we need to look after personal data. So, yeah, how good are you in this? Do you kind of delete stuff?
I do. I've set up all the gravity forms now so that they expunge the data after a certain period of time. I can't remember how that works, but basically most ingress of data for me comes via gravity forms. And so I have set whatever the capability is in gravity forms to expunge all that data. So I can't remember how it works, but that's the way I'm dealing with that kind of stuff. I'm still a bit mystified by this whole GDPR thing, to be honest. I still have yet to hear a story of somebody ordinary like me who's been bitten by it. But I think it was a bit of a wake-up call, and I do. I have amended my privacy policy, and I have amended my terms and conditions to hopefully get that stuff right. But not a great deal to add on that one, really. Do you?
Yeah, well, I took it seriously, and I took the bit that's been around for a long time, really, not the online stuff, but the data protection, the thing that we're supposed to get rid of data that we don't need. So old clients, particularly. So, ones that I don't look after any longer, there should be no reason for me to keep their data. So I had a clean out of that, but I've only just recently realized that I've not been that good on it, because I realized I've got kind of login details left on LastPass that belongs to them, and things like FileZilla. So there's still a bit of cleaning up to do.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the same for all of us. When we sadly lose a client, it's not right on the top of my list to go through LastPass and expunge all that. It's not right at the top of my list to go through and check that I've disconnected and removed all SSH keys and things like that, so I can't log into their site anymore. But I do periodically go through the settings in my IDE and just delete sites. I've no idea on my Mac what's happening to those SSH keys, whether they are truly being expunged or not. But I am cleaning it up as and when. But I don't really have a process of doing it at the moment I cease to work with them.
Yeah, and it's something I should be more conscious of, because being a bit of a digital nomad, and I'm working mostly from my laptop, and I'm often connecting to shared or public Wi-Fi as well.
Do you use a VPN?
I do a lot, and most of the time I'm renting a place where our internet's kind of our own, it's separate, so that's kind of okay most of the time. But it's something that I have to be really careful of, particularly when I am FTPing. In fact, I did this recently. This is in Thailand before, and I went to connect to my FTP, and I realized I was on the shared. But do you know what? My FTP, FileZilla, actually stopped me from connecting.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I was surprised about that. I really don't know, but it just wouldn't for the first time. And then I stuck my dongle in, which of course is hours. But I mean, again, it's one of those things.
Was it a change in IP address? Was that presumably it can't know what the type of the type of sharing of the internet connection is? I don't suppose it knows that, but maybe it does. Maybe there's some amazing mystery stuff going on. Some flag in the TCP connection that tells it this is shared. I literally don't know how it would do that. But I always use a VPN if I'm out and about. I because I'm basically based in the UK, and there's always a connection somewhere nearby. I very rarely have to use it, to be honest, because most of the work I'll do at home. But if I go into a client's office or something, I just switch it on, make it so that everything goes through there, and you don't even notice. It's just on my Mac, it's a little tiny, basically a green dot in the bar at the top, and so long as that's connected, it's fine. But yeah, I do take those precautions. I pay for a VPN annually.
Yeah. No, excellent. Yeah. So it's easy to slip up on those things, I think. But anyway, no issues so far.
Good.
But so other things. there is something we were talking about earlier, something that I started doing because I saw other people do it, and that's use a service which is, well, it's said as one time, but it's actually the URL for it, if no one's seen this, is the number one ty.me, and it's a way of sharing passwords with a client. So it's a self-destruct thing. So you put in your password, you share the link to the client. When the client opens it, they can take the password, but as soon as they've dismissed it, it's deleted.
Yeah, I think this is a really cool service if we can take them on face value that they are in fact expunging the data. So there's obviously that caveat, but let's assume that's true. It's a nice idea. I recently became aware that LastPass has the capability to share passwords in quite a clever way, in that you can share a password, but the other person, so long as they're a LastPass user, they don't actually have access to it. They can make use of it, but they can't see it, which I think is quite ingenious. So it can fill out a login field, for example, in WordPress, but there's no way that you can actually get that password out and look at it and scribble it down anywhere. So that's quite a nice way of doing it. And I would really, really strongly recommend that if anybody isn't using a password manager, that the way things are at the moment, you really should be. You should never be reusing passwords. They should be long, horrifically complicated, including all sorts of gibberish characters. And like I say, never reuse them. And the human brain can't keep up with that, so we have to give that knowledge to something else. And a password manager like LastPass or 1Password or Dashlane, all of these different rivals, they're worth investing in, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know that you could kind of share LastPass like that, but it's only you who told me how it kind of works, because I've never really shared with someone.
Yeah, I hadn't proactively done that. Somebody shared one into me, and then I was quite amazed how it worked, actually. The problem, of course, is getting these passwords and things like this to your clients, because virtually none of them are using a password manager. They're amazingly willing to share their information towards me. Like, if they bring their WordPress site to me, they'll quite happily send me an email showing me their username and password and what have you for the admin account. It flies over the internet, all in the clear, in an email, unencrypted. And always quite amazed that people are so willing to do this. I try, when I communicate this stuff with clients, I try to send this stuff through things like LastPass, but obviously most of them don't use it. So then I contrive to be a little bit security conscious. So I might send the login username or email in one service, so that might go through email. Then if I know their mobile phone number, I might text them the password. I mean, it's adding a little bit of security, but frankly, it's not particularly secure.
Yeah, exactly. The reason I use the one time is because of that link, because of the trying to get over to the client this idea that security is important, because I think nearly every client who's given me a password, and they do freely share it, gives me one that I think is so easy to crack.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been sent anything that's been a long, complicated password before.
And we do know that getting to WordPress, I suppose, that it is possible to brute force WordPress. You can just keep having a go at the username and password. And so if your client is using a ridiculously simple password, the word monkey123 or something like that, then there's a bit of education to be done there, and I can't see why we shouldn't be having those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I am conscious as well. I mean, I say the same thing every time, and I don't think anyone's ever done it. So, I will help someone to move their domain to our site when it's built, and they will give me their login to their domain registration account and I ask them always to change it after they let me have it, because I shouldn't have that kind of information.
Yeah.
And they never do.
I think that's really an important conversation to have, because obviously if something were to go wrong at some point in the future and they scan around in their brain, who's had access to this? Well, David Wormsley, he once had access to it. Could be him. Maybe he's done something. There's a feature in Google Domains that I've mentioned before. So it's domains.google.com, whereby you can delegate, I think is the word they use, you can delegate the ownership of domains to other people. So you could purchase the domain on their behalf because, they don't understand that process and they don't want to set up the DNS. And then you can delegate it to an email address. And from that moment on, at any moment of their choosing, if I've understood it correctly, nobody's actually deployed this with me yet, but I understand that they can then take it from you trivially. They don't have to go through the whole process of moving registrars and all that kind of stuff. They just keep it where they are, but they can take control of it. And then when you log into your Google Domains account, it's gone. You no longer have the capability to do that. I'm sure that's the same with other registrars, but I'd not come across that before, and I quite like it.
Yeah, that is good. I mean, I certainly come from a culture of looking out for those kind of responsibilities, making sure that you're always protected. I mean, I work in quite a few places that did childcare, and you always sort of made sure you did certain protections so you could never be accused of anything.
Yeah.
Right? You wouldn't leave yourself alone with a vulnerable person.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So, I think it reminds me really to look into those kind of things. That's why I'm kind of keen to say change your passwords. But when they don't do it, you're still kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. The recycling of passwords. I think the general consensus now, and I am going to be shot down in flames for this, I'm sure, but I'm speaking from a position of taking somebody's advice, let's say, who knows what they're on about. There used to be this policy in companies to sort of recycle your passwords every few months, swap it because you haven't changed it for a couple of months. Realistically, if your password is gibberish and long and complicated, there's no real need to change those things, so long as you can be sure that nobody has had access to it. The initial one will be good. Anyway, yeah, a bit of an aside that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, should we talk about? We don't do this because we try to get people on our care plans mainly, but I still have some of these people that have sites who will still come to me, but I don't manage them on a ongoing basis. So there's some questions there, aren't there, about security? They're going to manage their WordPress site. We've probably recommended it to them. Do we have a responsibility then to inform the clients about WordPress security?
I think WordPress security is an interesting one because of its massive surface area. It has a massive attack vector, because there's just so many people using it. But that isn't to say, that WordPress core is a bad piece of software. I would say that it's updated constantly. We do get these occasional little quick minor updates for security reasons. They can push it out from a central place. Now that update is being signed from now on. So that's an added benefit in WordPress's ecosystem that other CMSs possibly don't have. I would say WordPress core itself is pretty darn good depending on what hosting environment you've got it. It's the plugin architecture that causes the problems, the plugin and theme architecture, which is mostly to blame. And I do have this conversation with people who come to me. I do say, look, it's not really WordPress. It's just the nature of online software. It's liable to be attacked. You've got to there's got to be preventative measures, whether that's, well, we'll come to this, but whether that's backups or some sort of firewall. These are all good ideas. But you can't protect yourself fully. You've just got to do as best you can and have something ready for the rainy day when it goes down and all goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really beautifully put, actually.
Yeah.
No, I think that really sums it up. I think when I have tried to explain it, or largely it's been the colleague I worked with who had to explain it to clients, I don't think they really took it on board. I think maybe because their focus was on getting a website and not all the yada yada.
Yeah.
So even though they were told to update it, and that this is kind of important. And also, and I don't know who else does this. I mean, I'm kind of a bit sniffy about plugins. I don't like to get involved in putting a site together with plugins that I don't feel I trust. There's usually a warning for clients to go, all plugins that are on the repository aren't all created equally. They're not all as safe as each other.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I suppose some little easy to consume bits of, I'd hate to use the word wisdom, but they've been passed down to me as wisdom, so I'm passing it on. I'm not claiming wisdom. Is don't use the default admin account, so change that. Yeah. Make sure that your passwords are really obscure and strong and stored in some location where they can't easily be accessed without your authentication. And update everything. If you are going to use the plugin architecture of WordPress, which, let's be honest, most people do, then make sure that you update everything. Do your diligence, your due diligence, to make sure that you've got at least an angle on how reliable and updated the plugins that you're going to deploy are, and then make sure to jolly well update them as soon as there's an update available. I would say daily.
Yeah.
But, not everybody can manage that, but it would help if you could do it on a daily basis. More if possible. If you can automate those things and you're happy with the consequences, especially now that we've got the site health option in WordPress, you can update much more on an automatic basis and get feedback about what's gone wrong should something go wrong. Then you're protecting yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, I would love to know those people who do just build and don't have a care plan, whether they send their clients off with a security plugin installed, whether they do that or whether that's the client's responsibility. Because thinking about it now, I mean, those sites that didn't come on our care plan, well, before I had one, I sent off without a security plugin on. I didn't think they would understand what those plugins were telling them.
Yeah, which gets us into the whole licensing issue, which we'll save for another day, about whether whether that's a legitimate use of the license that you've given, or if it's a free one, that's fine. But I've forgotten what I was going to say now. It's completely gone out of my head. I'm sorry. I'm going to hand it back to you. Oh, that's annoying.
Okay. That's okay. Should we move on to what we kind of do? Because we really, with our care plans, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about what we actually promise in our plans to the clients. I mean, do we promise to clear their hacks if they get them?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, I've just remembered what I was going to say, and that is that when there's a client who doesn't want to be on the care plan, I have it's not really a sequence of emails in that it's not really automated, but I do send out emails shortly after launching the site and handing it over, and I do say, look, you just be mindful that it's a bit like driving a car without insurance. I don't actually use those words, but that's a decent analogy. You cannot really justifiably come back to me having crashed it. In this case, it's been hacked, or I did something horrific and now it won't load, the site won't display any content or whatever. You can't really legitimately come back and say, look, I think it's your responsibility to fix it. I do make that point. I don't really drive it home if they've said we don't want any part of your care plan, but I do make the point that, look, be mindful that this is a possibility, and then we kind of leave it there, and it's not really come back to bite me yet. So anyway, sorry. Regarding care plans, what do we promise? Yeah, I had to open mine up actually and have a look. I've got various levels. Basically, regarding the security, my care plans speak about backing up and the frequency of that backing up. The more you pay, the more often that backing up takes place. Uptime monitoring, so monitoring in terms of whether the site's gone down. There's loads of services out there which you can use, some of them free, some of them paid, where you can get every 5 minute little ping of the website, or possibly more if you pay, and it'll tell you if something's gone down. And I've found those to be very reliable, and that genuinely get the emails and they do go down, and genuinely get the emails and they do come back up. And then it's things like whether or not there's like security plugins installed and licensed and paid for. So they're the kind of three areas which I do really, uptime monitoring, some kind of security solution, and backing up.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd actually say that I'll get them back up and running again if there is any, because I do mention this one.
Yes.
And but we talked earlier as well, and in some ways we're the same, but we probably before this goes out we'll go and change our terms and conditions of it.
Yeah.
You will put them back, but not necessarily without losing some data, because you're going to use a backup, which is pretty much what I'm going to do as well.
Yeah, so when we were talking before this call, it did suddenly occur to me that, there might be problems with my strategy. But anyway, the principle being that backups are my best line of defense, if you know what I mean. What I mean by that is it's something that I can proactively do. I can do that. I can make the backups, I can put them somewhere safe, I can make sure that they're stored for the appropriate length of time so that they're available to me should something go wrong. What I don't have control over is when a hack will take place. So backups to me feel like my best foot forward, if you like. And then on top of that are security plugins and what have you. But yeah, the problem, which, fingers crossed, touch wood, all of that stuff, which hasn't really arisen too much for me, is the whole notion of a site getting hacked. It needs to be cleaned up, and yet the backups are so new. Sorry, the attack took place so long ago, and the vulnerability's been there sitting, waiting. Let's say it was in there for 3 months, but the site has been updated so many times within that 3 months that the backup is kind of pointless, because they've written loads of blog posts or they've added a whole bunch of content. That is a bit of a problem, and one that I'm sure other people have faced, and I don't really have, hand on heart, I don't really have the perfect answer for that.
No, well, I had to deal with quite a few hacks because of people who didn't come on our care plan, who haven't updated, have come to me, and just one only yesterday. And I've had to, I mean, they've not lost any data, because I have had to go through the task of cleaning up all of their files and hoping that, the hack doesn't come back. And so far it's been good. Yeah. And I've been lucky as well with my own sites that they haven't been hacked, the ones I've been managing. Or, well, that's not entirely true. A couple did, but they were very quickly found, and they were very simple hacks and were sorted. So I think, yeah, at the moment, I just wonder if that's, so in a way, we promised to get people up and running, but we're not really guaranteeing that we'll secure their data. And I've never really fleshed this out at all.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing that the conversation before we recorded brought to light, is that I haven't really fleshed this out either. I haven't really made it explicit or differentiated in any way that, the backup might not be the most recent. In other words, the hack could take place months ago, and so the backups will work. There's nothing wrong with the backups, but they might not get you back to exactly where you want to be. And obviously, let's say, for example, an e-commerce site, that's absolutely unacceptable. Yeah. It needs to be including all the orders. And I think at that point, weighing up time versus money, I would be reaching into my wallet as part of the care plan and paying for somebody to go through that, somebody who is an expert in this with a fine-tooth comb, looking at it, because after a few hours of my time scraping around, the payment to the professionals would make perfect economic sense, and I would feel happy that I had some kind of agreement with them that they'd done their job to the highest possible standard. Whereas I think the nature of the beast with hacks is you can never have that certainty that you yourself have cleaned it up unless you're a bit of an expert.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm waiting to find out soon, because so far they've been cleaned up, and I've been able to do it within reasonable time with various scanners. In my case, WordFence has been very good, positive, false positives, a lot of them. But as long as you can kind of work out what's happening, it's cleaned it up and it's done it for me. I guess I would need to do the same, because it's happened so infrequently that with hacks, and not ones I'm managing, that it would probably be better to know that there's a service I would call upon.
You see, that there are services like WP Security Audit Log, which realistically will be your absolute best friend should you need this. The problem is it's a bit like insurance. We sort of begrudge paying for things that we don't need until suddenly we need them, and we think, oh, why didn't I spend a fortune on the insurance that would help me out at this point? I went for the cheapest possible option, and it makes for a good starting point. You'll be able to see where this comes from. And I think that's the problem. The fear that I have a little bit around cleaning up sites is that without those logs, without a real fine-grained understanding, my worry is always, well, how did it get there? What was the thing that allowed it to be there? So cleaning it up is one thing. Okay, I've removed all the evidence of it. In a sense, I've hoovered around a little bit and cleaned the carpet. Yeah. But what put the muck on the carpet in the first place? How did that happen? And with a good security logging strategy, you increase your chances dramatically. Now, it might be that it was some vulnerability which a plugin update then patched, so it can't happen again. So you're fine. But you unless you've got those logs, I suppose, you're not going to know that. And that's where my worry comes from, cleaning it up, because of what you just said. You're hoping that you've done it. But the hope for me would make me lose sleep a little bit, I think, which is why I would happily pay somebody to do that.
And do you think they would always get to the bottom of that? Because
I don't suppose they would. They might just have the same approach. But I presume, not having enlisted the services of these organisations, I presume there's some standard agreement that you sign which places some responsibility onto them for having another look should it re-emerge. I don't know. Perhaps in the comments somebody could highlight that to us. I just feel that security is so ephemeral, so constantly on the move. The ice is always shifting, that you need to be really on top of this to understand what's going on, and it's just not my area of expertise. I have an anecdotal interest in it, but I'm not an expert on it.
Yeah, but I think it always comes down to my clients, they won't pay a lot for their maintenance. I've set it up so it's very affordable, so there's not much I can spend on these kind of services. So the best I can do is a backup. One thing that did cross my mind, we didn't talk about this earlier, which was whether you go for a incremental backup system instead, if you thought you had something like an e-commerce site that was busy, so it does a backup every time somebody makes a new order, say.
Yeah, well, my strategy with that is I just take a full backup every day. That is literally like what I do. There's and within that, obviously, I've got the database, I've got the files and what have you. But I could see the point. If you've got a big e-commerce store or something where there's actual importance in this, a database update every couple of hours would seem like absolute common sense. Absolutely, that makes sense. Yeah. But
I think some of them, though, are running on as soon as the event happens. So as soon as an order comes in,
some hook and it fires off. Again, why not? There's no reason not to. You've just got to have the capacity to store that stuff and the capacity for that to be happening in the background and not destroying the speed of your website loading, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, that's the big thing, because I'm a big fan of WordFence, but I'm not a big fan of how heavy it is. So I for a little while, until just recently, there was some hacks that friends of ours got. I was really thinking about just converting it over so something else did the scanning, and it saved on server resources. But I've completely turned around within a week into the fact that I'm not going to change what's been working for me because the scanner's so good.
This is in WordFence. You like the capability, even though it does use quite a lot of CPU cycles and times out on on cheaper hosting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it seems to be okay for that, but my rationale behind it now, and I'm starting to think a little bit about treating sites differently, because largely I've put the same stack in for everybody's sites, and there are some sites which just nobody, they could easily be static sites, really. They're updated maybe once a year and nobody goes into them. And I treat them the same as I do a busier site where they might get updates on every couple of days.
Yeah. What about the restriction of roles and things like that? Do you restrict the capability of your clients to interact with WordPress in any way, or do you give everybody admin permissions and just sort of hope for the best?
Yeah, well, we talked about this, and I've realized, in fact, I did realize before that I've been such a fool on this, really. I did give them, all the owners, admin rights, and anybody extra they wanted, I gave them lower roles. And I've really only just worked out months back, really, that all they need is to be an editor role, because the page builder I'm using, I can give them full access to everything they need on that. And while I'm managing their sites, they don't need to put in a new plugin or anything. And it just causes me problems if they do. And you said it perfectly before that they don't know anything else.
I'm wondering about all this sort of stuff. Should all of this go into my, if you like, contract at the beginning of the project? In other words, should I explicitly say, look, I'm taking daily backups, they'll be stored, but if there's a vulnerability and there's a hack, I can only restore the backups that I've got, and and it will have to go back as far as the vulnerability being discovered. But equally with this, should I be saying, and I wonder if anybody does do this, should I be saying, okay, WordPress has got this user permissions, user roles system. When we hand over the site, we're going to give you the editor role, and we are going to keep the administrator role for ourselves whilst you've got the site in our care. Obviously, if they demand the site, I've got no problems with giving them all of the files and everything, and at that point you can have the administrator role. I'm just saying this is a possibility. I don't have any strong thoughts on this, but maybe explicitly saying, whilst it's under our care, whilst you're paying for our care plan, our advice and our policy is that you will have the editor role, and we reserve the right to keep the administrator role, because it can break things, and we don't want the site being broken, do we? He said, sounding terribly condescending and patronizing.
No, but you just said the one thing about them not knowing anything else is just because I'd already decided that, of course, it's their site, so they can have an admin role, even when we're looking after it, as far as I'm concerned. But what I didn't need to do is to kind of give them that early, just wait until they request it. So which I'm doing now. They automatically go in and learn WordPress as an editor, so they don't see all of the stuff that I have to deal with. That's just distracting for them. But I'm pretty sure just saying that alone, they're not going to ask me for the administrator role.
No.
I think it's very unlikely. So it's taken care of.
Yeah, quite a lot of times, you'll do like a screen share or some way of showing your client what it is that you're trying to achieve. They'll write you, how do I do this? And you send them a Loom video or something of your screen. And I will explicitly say, look, there's a whole extra set of menus here which you won't see, but you'll have this one. You'll be able to see this menu. And they don't seem to mind. Nobody's come back and said, oh, that's weird. I want all of the capabilities that you've got. I've never really had that. I'm trying to think if that's true. Yeah, I can't off the top of my head remember a time where a client has gone, no, I want the full Monty. In my case, I would say most of my clients are somewhat afraid of breaking things, and they're quite happy for me to deal with all those things, because they just want to log in, create content, click save, log out, go away, come back in next month or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, mine comes out of the fact that I wanted to train people to use WordPress and their sites a bit more, but I think I've been initially a little bit over keen to expose them to everything that is there in WordPress, when they might as well ask for it.
Yeah.
They can have it. But I bet most won't ask for it.
No, there's a couple of things that the editor role is incapable of doing, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but I give the clients the editor role, and then occasionally they'll ask me for something which is beyond the scope of the editor role. So there are various plugins, and I can't remember the name of the one that I showed you before we started recording, but there are various plugins, and obviously you can do this yourself if you want, but if you want a nice point and click interface, you can have editor role. You can upgrade the editor role if you like, so that it inherits just a few of the admin permissions. And I've had to deploy that a few times just because it made absolute sense for the client to have this and for me not to do it all the time. So there are caveats. There are times when the editor role will not work out, and I've got around it in that way. But it's fine. And then you asked the question. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the plugin that you mentioned, because I've still got the tab open, is Editor Menu and Widget Access by Guy Primavera.
Yep. And I've used that a few times. And simply put, it just enables or disables certain items in it only works with the editor role. and it enables or disables certain things. And I can't remember what it was that I needed to enable. It might have been something to do with media or a page builder or something. And it fixed that problem for me, and we could move on, and they could do the task that they needed to do without really compromising anything that I wanted to keep from them because they were an editor. You've also put on here, do you restrict things like what a client can upload? Do you give them full access to all that as well?
I do. And that's included because I've been giving them administrator roles earlier on.
Okay.
Not so much now. They've been adding in some plugins. You see, I've tried to say this early to most of them that, it's your site, so you can do what you like. So that's what seems like a good idea. And most of them haven't touched it, but a few have. And certainly the sites where I don't manage them, they just have a knack for updating good plugins, but the ones that just seem to have a vulnerability recently. So that's given me a few.
That's absolutely diabolical, isn't it? They install the plugin in which the vulnerability arises the very next day.
It's almost like that. It's just bizarre. But yeah,
I think
there's been a couple of.
You used the word ownership or something a moment ago, and I think that's kind of the point of it, really. It's kind of, I don't make any claims on owning it, but whilst I'm looking after it, I kind of obviously have a different approach to you in that you have been, at least anyway, happy to give them the admin role, and you want for them to be able to explore what WordPress can do and learn what it can do. I think I've taken a bit more of a guarded approach, a bit more of a kind of castle and moat approach that. There's certain things that I want to restrict them from doing just because I don't want the extra burden of fixing stuff that they break. Because as soon as they come onto the care plan, in a sense, I take on the custody of that. I take on the ownership of fixing stuff when it goes wrong. So the more hands that are, the more, well, what's the expression? Cooks spoiling the broth. The more cooks that we've got, the more chance that it will get spoiled, and the more work that I will have to do. So yeah, it's just a different approach. And I bet our community is really split about this one. What user roles you give them, what access do you give them, what do you tell them they can do? And maybe in some cases you even build sites and never even let them know that there's a WordPress login. You literally do it all. They send you the copy, send you the images, and you upload it all as a post, and that they don't even know what WordPress is used for on that site. I bet some people are doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? I've changed my mind a little bit just having this conversation today about how I need to approach things, because I am keen that they feel they have ownership, and I am keen that they learn to be able to do things with their sites, because I think there's a demand for that amongst many clients. But I just don't think I need to give them too much too soon. I don't need to say they can't have it. I just don't need to shove it in their faces. And I think because my problem is exactly what you're saying. You take on the responsibility for the site while you're managing it. And if you encourage them by giving them admin access to go and use plugins, then they're going to do it. And then, I have to say something like, you uploaded something that was vulnerable, so you created the problem that we have. I don't want that conversation.
No, and it's a difficult balance, isn't it? And I suppose it would come down to, in your case at least anyway, it would come down to when the question is asked. You're not going to refuse them should they ask the question. But my guess would be that if you gave them the editor role and everything was based around that, I don't think that many of your clients, because they're running a business, they've got something better to do. The website is a function of the business. It isn't their business. It's just something that enables their business. That you probably won't get too many of those questions. They won't really ask, look, is there some feature that you've disallowed me from using? My assumption would be probably that they'll think, okay, this is the system that's been built for me. Here's what I can do. And they might occasionally reach out and say, is it possible for me to do this thing? At which point you might need to have those conversations. But I think it'd be fairly few and far between.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. This is a great chat for me anyway, if no one else, but because it's actually, and I think this is the important thing, isn't it? When we're talking about security, you need to have a rationale, something you believe in, else otherwise you always feel a little uncertain about what you're doing.
Yeah, indeed. So we do there is a case to be said for restricting what clients can do. Do you have like a password policy for clients? Do you enforce them to use strong password? I know that's kind of like going back to what we were saying earlier, but that was more about off-site stuff. Do you force them to do certain things like that?
I think I've nailed it now, because I set up their account and then give them the original strong password to go in initially.
Yeah.
And now it's part of the security plugin that I'm using, that it forces strong passwords. So if they try and change them or add anybody else in, they won't be able to use a weak one. Right. So I think I've probably nailed that one.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So what you send them upon sign up, you send them the WordPress email, and they then have to use a new password, but the plugin interrupts at that point and says, no, it must be a strong one. You can't give us a shoddy, weak password. Yeah, that is good. I'd forgotten that they do that, but you're right. I'm pretty sure that I enable that on every site as well.
Yeah, well, WordPress is pretty good. It suggests it gives you your password in the first place, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you would have to change it to a weaker one anyway, which I do like. But it's literally in WordFence for me and I think it's in many of them where you can just turn on force strong passwords so someone can't change it to something weak. Yeah. If they try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I have something to ask you, David, because we've now talked for 42 minutes, and we are nowhere near through this subject. My fear is that if we keep going, this podcast is going to end up as like probably close to 2 hours. What do you think? Should we split this one in two and offer our listeners the second part next week?
Yeah, why not? I think that's a good idea, actually, because we could talk a little bit on the actual tools that are out there, because we haven't really touched on those. There's a ton of them.
Yeah. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to save that for next week?
Let's save it for next week.
Let's do that. Okay. In which case, somewhat surprisingly, we're going to split the episode up into two parts, because there's just more to say. So we'll make it so that it happens next week. So we'll just follow on from exactly where we got to. And okay, so for now, we'll knock that one on the head, but we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us on the WP Builds podcast again this week. I hope you got something out of that. And remember that next week we'll be talking about the kind of plugins and available options that are in the WordPress ecosystem. So join us for that. Sorry that we had to cut it short this week, but honestly, you don't want to listen to an hour and a half of David and I droning on about internet security. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by WP and Up. 1 in 4 of us will be directly affected by mental health related illness. WP and Up supports and promotes positive mental health within the WordPress community. This is achieved through mentorship, events, training and counselling. Please help enable WP and Up by visiting wpandup.org/give. Together, we can press forward. Okay, that's almost it for this week. Just a couple of things to say. Join us next Thursday, obviously, for the next instalment of this podcast. Join us on Monday when we'll be going through the WordPress news. Very early in the morning, I release an audio version of my take on the WordPress news for the previous week. And then at 2 p.m. UK time, we do a Facebook Live in which I'll be joined by some special guests in the WordPress community in the WP Builds Facebook group, which you can find over at wpbuilds.com/Facebook. It's very nice when people join us and comment and so on. It's really, really very lovely indeed. But that's it, I think. So maybe I'll see you Thursday, maybe I'll see you Monday, but I hope to see you again soon. I'm going to fade in some cheesy music. Bye-bye for now.